Hey, this is Miss Hanson. I'm doing my second lesson. It's going to be analyzing the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which had to do with the Senate race back in 1858. I've got several questions that I'm going to put up a piece of paper with the question on it, and then I'm going to give the political view of Lincoln and Douglas as far as the things that they were going to be debating over, which was mainly two things, which was slavery and the expansion of slavery. I'm going to get started, and the first question you're going to look at is, what were the Lincoln and Douglas debates? Okay? What were the Lincoln and Douglas debates? The debates were a series of debates in Illinois that took place in the 1858 U.S. Senate election. The topics of the debate were slavery and its expansion into the West, and the idea of popular sovereignty. Okay? That was what the Lincoln-Douglas debates were going to be dealing with. Okay? Now, second question that I'm going to look at right here. It says, what did Lincoln attempt to make people believe about Stephen Douglas? In other words, what did he want the people to see Douglas as portraying? Lincoln attempted to convince people that Douglas favored an expansion of slavery into the United States. He proceeded to argue that Stephen Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which we discussed last week, were part of a conspiracy to make slavery lawful in all of the states. That means the old states and the new states that were coming into the United States. Now, there's Lincoln's view. Now, what was the next question going to be? As you can see, it's going to be, what did Douglas accuse Lincoln of during the debates? And with the presidential elections that were going on before school was let out for the year, you saw a lot of debates going on between the candidates of the running for the Democratic spot, or trying to get the Democratic spot. There's a lot of mudslinging, so to speak. Douglas accused Lincoln of being a black radical and argued that Lincoln's goal was to incite civil war, emancipate the slaves, and make blacks the social and political equals of whites. That was what Douglas accuses Lincoln of during the debates, okay? Now, we've talked about what the debates were about. We've discussed the view that Douglas tried to portray Lincoln as, and how Lincoln tried to portray Douglas, okay? Now, what was the actual political view of each individual, okay? Now, on Abraham Lincoln, as far as slavery goes, Lincoln did not want to attack slavery where it already existed. In other words, he wanted to leave it alone, okay? He was against the expansion of slavery into the western United States, but where it was already the states that had slaves, he wanted to just leave it alone. He didn't want to stir up anything. Now, on the expansion of slavery, Lincoln was against the expansion of slavery into the western United States. He didn't want it to go, as the population went west, he did not want it to go west. Now, Stephen Douglas. His point of view on slavery, Douglas believed that Southerners had a right to keep the slaves they already owned. He wanted them to be able to keep the slaves. And as far as expansion of slavery, Douglas proposed at Freeport that citizens in western states should be granted popular sovereignty, which would allow them to decide by vote if they wanted to be a free or a slave state. In other words, they could choose if their state wanted to be free or if it wanted to be slave. They would vote on it to decide. So you can see two different views there between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Now, the last question that I have for this section, what did Lincoln mean in his famous quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand"? I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. Okay? Now, that was a question what do you think he meant by that? The house divided was an analogy of the United States, and Lincoln believed that the United States could not continue to exist in a concept of both a free and a slave state. He wanted the country to continue to make compromises on the existence and expansion of slavery. He was against it, in other words. He was against the country continuing to make compromises on the existence and the expansion of slavery. So, that's just a quick 4 questions that has to do with the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I gave you a quick overview as far as the political view of each one on the 2 main topics, which was slavery and the expansion of slavery. Because remember, we were still going west, and there's a lot of states that hadn't even come about yet. And this was a big topic in this election. That being said, everybody stay safe. I miss my students. I look forward to the school year starting and all of us getting to see the students again. Remember to go to the Webster Parish portal. There's work. There's brand new work there for them to do for this week. There's short lessons in ELA, math, social studies, science, and keyboarding. Real quick. It won't take them probably 10 minutes, if that, to even do the assignments. It's just something to keep them going and, keep them on track as far as for school. Now, the next topic I'm going to be going over is we're going to analyze John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, okay? And the last lesson I should touch on the Civil War, okay? Because all of this is leading up to the Civil War, okay? So, everybody stay safe. Have a good evening.